So today, stopping by the studio, I have Valerie Young. This is exactly where you need to come for credible life advice. You ask the questions, and we're going to answer them. So, Valerie, it is so nice to have you on the show today. Thank you so much for coming by.
I am thrilled to be here.
Oh, that's great. Okay, so for those of you who don't know who Valerie is, I am going to tell you. Valerie got her PhD from your EDD, from University of Massachusetts Amherst. Mm-hmm. And while you were there, you were studying education.
Yeah, social justice.
And you were in a class, and somebody started talking about imposter syndrome.
Absolutely.
And you were just
nodding my head like a bobblehead doll.
Amazing. Can you tell us a little bit about your trajectory and what happened after that?
Yeah, I mean, at the time I was a 21-year-old doctoral student at the same university where my mother was working as a second shift custodian. And Amazing. Somebody brought in a paper by Dr. Pauline Clance and Dr. Susan Imes, the two psychologists who coined the term the imposter phenomena, and started describing how.
Do you know when they wrote that article?
I want to say 1977, I believe.
Okay. So after the feminist movement, the first wave.
Yeah, right around that same time. But, started describing how all these bright, capable, competent women, I mean, they thought at the time it was just women, very quickly realized there's a lot of men who also have these feelings. But it was describing how all these bright, capable, competent women didn't feel that way, thought they were fooling folks, and I just nodded my head like a bobblehead doll, like, oh my God, that's me. So it immediately resonated to the point where I changed the topic of my research and decided to look specifically at women's self-limiting attitudes and behaviors.
So can you clarify then for us what is an imposter syndrome? And by the way, I'm going to put the book up because this, and I can say I gave a speech last year in Zurich, and they brought this book into the seminar that I was doing, and I absolutely fell in love with it. And so I know I needed to meet you. I'm so like, yeah, I get to. So your book is The Secret Thoughts of Successful Women, Why Capable People Suffer from the Imposter Syndrome, and How to Thrive in Spite of It. But you've written a few books. This isn't your only book.
It's my only book with a major publishing house,
okay.
With Random House.
Okay.
I've self-published different books
since then,
on different subjects.
Under this end. But you speak mostly about this.
I speak primarily about this.
And you've spoken at over 100 universities now?
It's probably about 89 universities now in U.S., Canada, and Japan.
So you do a lot of corporate training?
Corporate speaking, yeah.
Massive corporate training, I saw that. And you do a lot of, you love teaching graduate students and faculty as well.
Yeah.
Lots of training.
I mean, very different. What's fascinating about this topic now is I've spoken to the Space Science Telescope Institute, and then Romance Writers of America.
Right. Because everybody's, it's a natural equalizer.
Yeah.
It's a natural equalizer. Okay, so again, what is imposter syndrome?
Well, it's not technically a syndrome in the,
in the DSM.
Exactly.
Yes. Oh, very good clarification. Even I should have clarified that.
Well, it's gotten popularly called that, so I kind of stuck with it.
Yes.
But it really describes an experience whereby, despite evidence of your abilities and accomplishments, deep down you feel like secretly you're not as bright and capable, competent, maybe as talented as people think you are, and that you've somehow kind of slipped through the system undetected. So, we've got this evidence of our abilities, awards, degrees, titles, whatever that might be, but we have a hard time internalizing those, and we, chalk them up to things like luck, timing, personality. They just like me. If I can do it, anybody can.
Right.
So I've heard many creative excuses over the years, but the bottom line is, we just have a hard time really resonating with them and feel like deep down we've really fooled them, and it's just a matter of time before we're found out.
So it feels slightly different to me than labeling something as low self-esteem.
It is different, yeah.
It's different, right? It's a nuance different, but it's different.
Well, it's different, and again, I'm not a psychologist, but self-esteem, let me be clear, there are some studies that have connected self-esteem.
Yes.
Other studies have not.
Okay.
Which tells me that it's possible to have, healthy self-esteem and still have imposter feelings.
That would be me.
Yeah, absolutely. And
right.
A psychologist described it to me once as to think about self-esteem as kind of a global sense we have about ourselves, but imposter feelings are very specific to achievement arenas, work, school,
business.
So
I like that definition of it.
You don't feel like an imposter when you're walking the dog, or emptying the dishwasher, or commuting to work, but you do in a job interview, when you're meeting with senior people, your first client, sitting in a class and you're afraid to raise your hand.
Yes. So, it was funny when I was taking the taxi down here, I thought part of the thing that's a little bit scary about reading your book is when you really highlight some of the ways that imposter syndrome or specifically gender bias affect our lives. Now, we all know this, especially in light of when we're doing this interview, which is right after the Brendan Kavanaugh hearings have happened and he's been confirmed. So it's in the conversation quite a bit about men and women and equal pay and equal rights and those sorts of things. But one of the things that was remarkable, and I have it here, which killed me, and I don't think I'll ever forget once I read it, was when they actually took a screen and put it in front of musicians. Mm-hmm. Can you explain that study? Do you know what I'm talking about in the book?
Yeah, when there's a blind audition where the people doing the judging can't see the gender or frankly any other physical characteristics of the musician, women were more likely to advance to the next round and the next round after that. And there's many other studies based on race.
Yes.
And also based on gender. I just heard one.
So it was just when there's a screen in front of you and it's just based on talent alone.
Just talent alone. And I just literally heard this morning, so I have to look this up. But
yes.
This was, somebody shared me this morning, a study in Israel where teachers were given math exams. When there was no name on the exam, the girls tested higher on the exam. When they put names on the exam, the boys tested higher. So, teachers bring in bias into the classroom all the time, as we all do. And here's the thing I want to say about gender bias, race bias. This is not just male bias or white bias, that in all of those unconscious bias studies, women and people of color, et cetera, are also doing the evaluating. We've all been socialized.
Oh, right. I understand what you're saying. So it's not just like we're showing these exams to white teachers, right? We all, no matter where you fit on the spectrum, male, female, whatever race, we all have internalized, you're saying, gender or racial bias. Yeah. It's so interesting because given the work I do on Fox, I get a lot of pushback about white privilege and bias. And what I loved about your book is that in some ways it's very much, I said, you're my brand of feminism. But I love it because it's really backed up with a lot of scientific studies that you just can't really argue with. And so I really appreciated that about it. But I thought in the cab coming down here, wouldn't it be amazing to spend 1 year, not to say I'm going to do this, but I think it would really be fascinating to spend 1 year documenting, let's say on Instagram, 5 ways which I'm going to face my imposter syndrome every single day.
Right.
Like it couldn't just be one phone call that I'm going to make that I'm afraid to make because I don't think I'm good enough.
Right.
It's going to be 5 like sort of major things. And just to see if I'm consciously trying to lean into my imposter syndrome, how much further I could get in my career, however I deem to measure that. It would be really fascinating. And essentially, you teach that we can't talk our way out of imposter syndrome, which I thought was really fascinating, given the fact that I'm a psychotherapist. And I've talked about imposter syndrome for the last decade with over 20,000 hours of people's life stories I've talked about. You actually give some really practical tips on how to cope with it.
Yeah. Well, let me be clear. Talking about it is an important first step.
Yes.
Especially if you don't even realize that there's a name for these feelings. And
yes.
Oh my God, other people feel the same
way.
Right.
It's not just I have terrible self-esteem.
Right. It's not just me. Millions of people around the world in multiple disciplines, across different fields have these feelings.
And high-achieving people.
Very
high-achieving people have
Absolutely.
these.
I mean, somebody said to me recently, she said, this is crazy. I shouldn't feel this way. I have a PhD.
Yeah.
And I said, no, you feel this way because you have a PhD.
Wait, can you extrapolate on that a little bit? Because what's really been fascinating, the guests that I have in here that are highly educated, and you can tell me if there's a correlation here, we talk about those people who don't have necessarily the formal degrees as having somehow less imposter syndrome. They're so confident in their belief systems and the advice that they give.
Right.
Where here I am, 2 master's degrees in, still paying off my student loans. And not that I'm getting over it, just because having these conversations helps me say to myself, I'm not going to spend the rest of my life worried about this. Like, I'm just going to keep moving forward. Yep. And I need to model that for other women, that they should really lean into their imposter syndrome and sort of blow past it. But it's amazing. And we talk about this all the time. We talk about it off camera a lot. Some people just have so much self-confidence and they're not necessarily credentialed. So I always wonder if there's a correlation between what you just said, that because you have these higher level degrees,
Right.
you're sort of more shaky inside about your ability to perform.
It could be because you have the degrees, because people then have an expectation of you when they introduce you, especially
is that what it
as kind
is?
of, well, that's one reason. But I also think that part of what's driving imposter feelings is this distorted notion we have about what it means to be competent. So one of the competence types that I talk about, I mean, there's perfectionism, but the person I call the expert, in their mind, they have to know, to get more and more credentialed. There's always one more book to read, one more class to take, one more degree to get. This kind of endless pursuit of the end of knowledge.
Right.
We're waiting to wake up one day and say, now I'm an
I've
expert.
arrived. Right.
When there are other people who are just completely self-taught.
Right.
Which is a perfectly legitimate way, but
Of course.
the difference is you kind of own it. And
They own it.
I own it. Like, well, I'm just as competent as anybody else. I read all these books. I did, I kind of created my own discipline, my own study. Now, I don't want you going performing surgery.
Yeah. Right.
out of a manual,
Right.
YouTube videos.
Well, it's funny you say that, because one of the things if anyone who's ever been in my office can attest to, or worked for me, I always say, they say, I'm afraid to try this. Like, I'm afraid I'm not good enough, or I'm afraid to try it. And my next line is always, no one's going to die on the table unless you're a surgeon and someone's going to die on the table.
Right.
So that's why I really generally approach things with very little fear, which is different. I still have imposter syndrome. I just don't have fear about trying.
Right.
It doesn't mean I'm not feeling the feelings while I'm trying to do something new.
Yep.
But if no one's going to die on the table, I'm always like, why don't we just try?
Right.
But I also think, and I wonder if this is true as well, that women are, and when I was rereading the notes from this last night, that women must be really good at sort of working with the imposter syndrome a little bit better, because they become more resilient, because they're used to working against the grain a little bit. They're maybe more used to failure.
That could be. Generally speaking, I do find it holds women back more.
You do.
Yeah, I think men, and we're generalizing, right? I mean, there's always exceptions, but men are much more comfortable, I think, with jumping in and figuring it out kind of on the fly as they go.
Right.
And women think we need to know 150% before we possibly, could raise our hand and say, yes, I can start that business, or I can do this thing, whatever it might be, apply for a job.
Right, apply for the job or do whatever.
Yeah, I think men understand, and certainly a lot of women understand, that you're not being hired because you've done this for 20 years. You're being hired because they know you have the capacity to figure it out.
Right, right. So what are some of the tips that you give women or people in general, not just men and women? What do you give them? What are some of the major tips that you give people?
Yeah, I've really honed it to kind of 3 core things now. The first,
because there's like 10. There's generally 10 too. There's
funny,
a list.
I used to give people 10.
Really,
I don't
and now
do that
you're down to
anymore.
3.
Well, here's why. I used to give,
Because I wrote down a bunch
well,
that I love.
For
by
decades,
the way,
decades, I would give audiences 10 things they could do.
Yes.
And then in the evaluation, people would say, well, it was really good, but I wish she told us more things we could do.
right.
And I would think, well, maybe I should give them 20, or maybe 80, or maybe 300. Like what's a good number?
Right.
Or they might come up in a Q&A and say, this is great, but is there anything else we can do?
Yes.
And my response was always, of the 10 things I just gave you, like, what have you tried?
Right.
They would say, well, nothing, but is there anything else? And honestly, it took me years and years. It was like, is it them? Is it me?
Am I not communicating my point clearly?
It finally hit me. What they wanted was to walk in the door, or maybe read the book, and then
know.
walk out the door not feeling like an imposter, right? You come in feeling like an imposter, you leave not feeling like an imposter. And I hadn't satisfied that.
Right.
So now I'm really clear in making sure people understand that feelings are the last to change.
Yes.
The only
This
difference,
is not an instant gratification
not at
pill.
all. And
yeah.
it's the last to change. The only difference between people who don't feel like imposters and people who do, they're no more intelligent, capable, competent than the rest of us. It's just in that exact same situation where we might have an imposter feeling, they think different thoughts. I mean, that's it, which is amazing, because really what it means, we just have to learn to think like non-imposters.
So when you say they think it, and there's many reasons why they might think different thoughts. Mm-hmm. One being like men tend to have less imposter syndrome than women.
That's one reason.
That's one reason.
They could have got some very good, healthy messages growing up around failure and resiliency and getting back in the game. And, and somebody else might have got messages like, if it's too hard, you don't have to try.
Right.
So
and all the subconscious and like microaggressions and little things we also pick up that we talked about.
Yeah.
That we internalize.
Yeah, or just the ways you were socialized. If you're trying to, your parents gave you these messages that you had to, be perfect. right? Or the only thing that was acceptable was all A's,
Right.
And you're going to get very invested in being quote unquote smart. I really try to stay away from that term smart.
Yes.
You know, because a lot of smart people who don't go anywhere in life because they don't apply themselves.
It's so true.
And then someone else could work like a dog and put in the effort and be, persevere through difficulty and challenge, and they're going to come out
And
more
achieve.
successful. Absolutely.
So what does a non-imposter think when they're in the same sort of situation? Like, I've got this, I can kill this, I'm going to slay this. This is
Sometimes, or it might be something, they fail. And so they can be kind of crushingly disappointed, but not ashamed, right? The only time you feel shame is if you really didn't try.
interesting.
So it's much more, we understand it in terms of sports. We know somebody's going to win, somebody's going to lose. But when it comes to our own performance, we can be so hard on ourselves. But if we model sports and go, literally they could be crying into their towel on the bench, right? They are disappointed,
Yes.
but they don't hang up their towel and go home. They go watch the game tape.
Right.
They go get more coaching. They say, we'll get them next time.
Right.
But they allow themselves the time to feel disappointed.
And then they get back out
And
into
then
the
they
game.
get back in the game. I mean, another example is when you feel like an imposter, you want a lot of validation from other people. And that's a problem. I met a young woman yesterday, literally. She said, whenever I send a memo, I really want validation back. She said, I know that about myself. I said, that's a problem.
Wait, a memo? She said a memo?
Or anything.
I thought a memoir. Okay, but a regular memo?
Well,
Wow.
emails, she says she just really, she craves validation because she got
Right.
so much of it growing up. And she
Interesting.
knows that. And
Interesting.
I said, that's a problem because constructive criticism is a gift.
Right.
And that's another difference. People who feel like imposters, really we are. It's like it crushes our soul. You get a performance evaluation. They tell you 4 things you're doing great, 1 thing you need to work on, and you feel like this loser. Which is crazy because it is a gift. I mean, you understand. I paid tens of thousands of dollars to get coaching from people who are far beyond me professionally.
Yes.
I'm not paying them that kind of money to tell me I'm great. Right?
But
I want to get better.
Right. But does that mean that people who suffer with imposter syndrome are not only are they less likely to put themselves out there?
They might put themselves out there. They might be, win, Oscars. I mean, they still put themselves out there.
They still put
them
them out there. But are they more likely in studies, or we don't know this, if they fail, they give up? Like, is there a correlation?
So there's two tracks you can go on,
Okay.
right? One is to kind of fly under the radar.
Because I'm the imposter who just keeps going.
Right, absolutely.
P.S. Just so, I actually thought I should call this show, like, I could give you advice, but like you might want to think twice about taking it.
Yeah, that's funny. Well,
Right.
but and I'm not suggesting you're a workaholic, but
No.
I mean, hard work and over preparing is a
I'm a total workaholic.
Is a coping
yes.
mechanism.
Yeah,
And it, as
I'm a not
is-
proud working alcoholic. Yes.
But it serves you, right? You're getting something from it. The harder you work, the more successful you're going to be.
Yes.
But on the other end of the continuum is the person who kind of flies under the radar. They don't speak up in meetings. They don't ask questions. They don't go for promotions. They don't grow their business. Because if they can kind of play small, they'll avoid humiliation, rejection,
All those
failure.
feelings.
I mean, and both strategies work, meaning they manage the anxiety of, waiting for the other shoe to drop,
Right.
and they help you avoid being found out, but always at a cost.
And what would the cost be?
Oh, well, burnout. A woman in Canada, she co-founded the first domain registration company in Canada. She had a bleeding ulcer in her early 30s. I mean, she was a super achiever.
Just working
immigrant.
constantly.
Yeah, immigrant. And it's not just women, international students, first generation professionals. There's a lot of people who have these, more likely to have these imposter feelings. But, the janitors would find her sleeping in her office at night. She was surviving on, 3 or 4 hours a night because she was driven by her imposter feelings. And she's talked a lot about this publicly. So, there's burnout. The cost, if you fly under the radar, there's going to be financial costs at some point. You're not going to be as successful financially. You're never going to get your ideas out there. You're not going to learn as much.
Well, and then the
grow.
regret at the end of the day is
Absolutely.
huge.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So back to the tips.
Okay.
Back to the tips.
All right, so the first one was normalize imposter feelings.
Normalize. Okay, so we all have it. Don't feel ashamed
Yeah,
that
well, we don't all, but
right.
It's
Okay.
estimated 70% of people do.
Feel
so,
some.
This is where I break it to people that they're not special.
Yeah. I'm so not special. What do you mean, Valerie?
Well, and I want people to talk about it in a normalizing way. I want them to say, oh, I had such an imposter moment in that meeting, just kind of off the cuff, right? So then getting back to the second one, which is to kind of reframe, right? Start thinking the way non-imposters do. So another example of that is one student might walk into an elite university, first-year student, and go, oh my God, everyone here is brilliant. Another student walks in and goes, wow, everyone here is brilliant. I'm going to learn so much. Same sentence, but they're coming into it from a slightly
different perspective.
Absolutely.
There, right?
Another way to think like a non-imposter is what we want. Those of us who are these imposter folks, we want to feel confident 24/7, and the fact that sometimes we don't feel confident in our mind kind of proves, well, I must be an imposter, because if I was really competent, I'd feel confident all the time. But
I love this distinction.
Well, it's true.
Because in some areas of my life, for example, I'm enormously confident. I'm fine. Like, I don't have any imposter syndrome.
Yep.
And then there's other little places where, I still struggle to pick up the phone and make that phone call that I know is going to be a bigger phone call, like knocking on a bigger door.
Yeah.
Still like, what happens if I get to that meeting, which I have been, and they start asking me too many questions and I can't articulate myself properly, and what am I going to do then? I'm getting better because I just don't have the time to care. Like, the bandwidth has shrank.
As you get older, you care less.
Is that true? I hope so.
I do.
That's definitely happening to me, I think. Like, I just have to make the phone call and hit the meeting. But that's interesting that that just because you feel it in some areas of your life doesn't mean you're a total fraud. We
have moments of confidence. Yes. We have moments of self-doubt. Denzel Washington, before he walked out on Broadway, when he was in Fences, he said, when you're standing in the wings, if you don't have that what the hell am I doing here moment, it's time to hang it up.
Yes.
Joan Baez had horrible stage fright. She would come out, sing a few songs, go off stage, vomit, come back, finish the concert. Don't confuse confidence with competence. That said, I think this is really important, is that the research shows that people in a group are more willing and interested in following the more confident person than the more competent person.
Yes.
And we're spending all this time trying to be more and more competent and credentialed and
credible. It's all about when you're in academia, it's all about credibility.
Right. And I think we have to work on being,
confident
as well
in what we say. So maybe that means I shouldn't publish this interview. As I'm telling everybody, I don't feel that confident. No.
Well, it's about feeling entitled to have an off day, to be wrong, to make a mistake, and to just be able to shake it off much more quickly.
Well, or also I would add to that is have this human conversation. That there's some days where you just feel like, wow, that went really well. And there's other days where you're like, that didn't go so well. It wasn't my best. But, it's a sum of all things.
Absolutely. Right? I speak all the time. And I could be in one audience and say something and get this big reaction. Another audience like nothing. And I want to say, are you kidding me? That joke killed at the University of Iowa. Come on.
So, but you realize you can't take that personally as well.
It's not always you. And, you're going to get them next time. Again, it's like expecting yourself to always win the Oscar or expecting to win the Super Bowl or every single game. It's like not how life works. One thing your listeners can do, they can Google Princeton professor failure CV. He has his regular CV on his website, and he has his failure CV.
I love those.
The papers that got rejected, the conferences that didn't want him, the jobs he didn't get. Because we think success is this kind of straight line trajectory, and it's not. It's hills and valleys.
I think actually I read somewhere recently that Morgan Freeman got his first acting gig. It was either in his late 40s or early 50s. We think he's been around forever. Right, and this huge superstar forever. Ariana Huffington didn't create HuffPo until her 50s, I believe. Yeah. So, we think of these things and think like, oh God, well, they've always been so successful. But the reality is I think that's a good practice, actually. I might do that. I might actually do that exercise. I think that's a great one. Also because I'm actually really proud of my failures in the sense that, and I would do this with patients as well, because it also means that shows how many times I've gotten back up and kept trying.
Absolutely. I mean, the goal is to have, Garrison Keillor told some graduating class to have interesting failures.
Yes.
Since we're going to fail. I saw a woman once introduce Hillary Clinton, this is way before the election, she was still Secretary of State, in front of 7,000 people. She introduced her. And she got her pages mixed up in the middle of the introduction. And she couldn't get back on track. And it was a clear plexiglass podium, so there was no hiding the fact that her papers. And I'm sitting there thinking, that's an interesting failure.
Yeah.
She's not going to be happy that happened.
Right.
But she had the honor still, she got to be the one to introduce her.
Yeah.
You know, stuff happens. You just got to kind of laugh and move on.
Right. Of course. Okay. So third tip. What would the third tip be?
The third tip is to basically, like, again, don't wait until you feel confident to kind of keep going. You know, keep going regardless of the messages you got growing up, or from teachers or people who maybe made assumptions about your intelligence or your competence or your abilities. And definitely keep going regardless of how confident you feel. I see women, especially whether it's not going for promotions or not starting their business or their practice,
yes,
because they're waiting to feel more confident. Well, good luck with that. You know, you just got to do the thing. Right.
You know, it brings up an interesting point. Two things for me come up there. You mentioned this point in your book where keep your hand raised.
That was Sheryl Sandberg's
yes,
story. Yeah.
Yeah. This idea that, you know, the man that Sheryl Sandberg was giving a lecture, and she said, I'm only going to take 2 more questions. And all the women in the room, because they were super polite, put their hands down. Well, the men still had questions they want answered, right. And they kept their hands up. And so she took away from it, I need to lean in, I need to keep my hand up.
Right. It was a young employee went to her afterwards and said,
Amazing.
I just had an aha. It's not just about putting your hand up, it's leaving your hand up.
Yes. And I think that's true. I think it's about, like, just because you just got to keep knocking on those doors.
It's persistent.
I think too, it's really important. I'm going to say this again and again. In my career, what I've seen now at this point as well is that you knock on little doors, and I think women are so nice. We knock on these little doors all the time and say, oh, please, can you let me in? Yeah. And can I have that meeting? You knock on little doors, little things happen. You knock on big doors, big things happen. Like, don't be afraid. I mean, when we started this show, I came up with a massive bucket list and said, these are the women I want to interview. Here's the men I want to interview. Here's everybody in between. Let's see who says yes. And it's been fascinating to see who says yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we've got yeses from people we never thought would say yes to us.
And here's the thing.
Including you.
It takes no more effort to play big or to think big than it does to play small.
Yes. Say that one more time. The hustle's the same.
Yeah, it takes absolutely no more effort to play big than it does to play small.
Yes, I love that. I think, I don't know if we should probably end on that brilliant note, but there's a few more things I wanted to say here that I thought were really important from the book. And this is a little controversial, or might feel a little controversial to people who are listening, but it didn't feel that way to me. If you are male or pale, you are presumed competent until proven otherwise. Much of the bias against female competence, bias held by both men and women, is subtle and largely unintentional, but that does not mean it's trivial or inconsequential. I loved that. I love that. Because the reality is that there's massive ramifications for people who go up against gender and racial bias.
Yeah, and it's just so well documented. I mean, you can be upset about it. I would really encourage men to, rather than see it that as...
right, because they're seeing... Do you get a lot of pushback from the...
You know, I don't, because it's, you know, I know the pushback is out there in the world. I mean, if I was blogging, I'd get huge pushback. That
was one of the questions I had for you. You do get pushback. It's gotten
crazy. I did a Huffington Post article, and I just mentioned that the traditional male definition of success is money, power, and status. Like, for better or worse, men have been tracked into that, and to a lot of their detriment, right? So they're missing out on joy, satisfaction, you know, meaning, you know, relationships, because they get tracked and judged by other men. Mm-hmm. I didn't get into a big elaborate thing, but this guy wrote, you know, I was with you all through the article until you brought up men being different. It's like, but there are differences, and it's really okay to talk about differences. It's like we can't even bring that up anymore.
Right.
And I think we all have to understand that there are experiences that I have that are different than other people have, and, you know, vice versa. That subtle things we're not even aware of. Right.
Well, it's about having these nuanced conversations, which is one of the reasons that I wanted to start this, was because on the shows that I'm on, the conversations are 3 minutes long.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden, white privilege, something like that, gets dropped into the conversation, and everybody sort of freezes. And especially on Fox. But then we're not allowed to have a more nuanced conversation about what we're really talking about there, and see it from complex points of view. Mm-hmm. There were a couple more questions. Do you still ever feel imposter syndrome?
Yeah, you know,
even though you're so mindful and talk about it all the time.
But see, that's the key. My goal is not for people to never feel like an imposter. Again,
I love that I get on this question.
Kind of information, insight, and tools to talk yourself down faster. You know, so instead of an imposter life, you have like an imposter moment, or 24 hours, an hour, right? but not a whole entire existence. To recognize this is what's happening. This is maybe the situation that I'm in. The situation might be causing me to feel this way. That's my organizational culture, the field that I'm in, the situation that I'm in. Or I just need to step back and kind of reframe what just happened.
Right. Really, in the end, ultimately, too, something you're talking about is how do we deal with anxiety? Because really that as we're sitting here talking, I'm like, what is that imposter thing? And it's just that feeling of nervousness or anxiety over performing.
Yeah.
And so it's about that key, like how can you quickly deal with that anxiety or continue to perform while you have the anxiety, but not let it slow you down. And I love that. That is going to stay with me forever, that quote, which is, I want to have an imposter moment, not an imposter life. You said, I think you said it. Thank you so much, Valerie, for being here. What's in your future? Can you tell us? Are you writing another book, or?
I pray to God I'm not writing another book.
Why? As someone who has an MFA, why do so many of the people who come on this show be like, I'm going to leave that one to you?
You know, it was the hardest thing I ever did. There's other things I would rather do.
Spend your time doing.
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah,
that's what everyone
books.
says.
Yeah.
And here it's like the goal for so many people. Interesting.
Yeah. I mean, no, you know, I'm really glad that I did it, but I'm not.
You're not going. You're done.
Yeah.
You're done
I mean,
with that.
you know what?
For
I
now.
might do like a really short, abridged version.
Yes.
You know, I might create an app.
Yes.
You know, reframing app. You
Yes.
know, and I have a lot of different ideas.
And that was the last thing right there. You know, we can't get into it completely on the show here. Reframing is for me, falls under the category of a little bit of cognitive behavioral therapy. Mm-hmm. And that reframing it's a great. Do you have any books you can recommend on reframing or?
Yeah, Carol Dweck's book Mindset.
Yes.
When I read that
book,
book,
I have to tell you, I was at one of my kids' conferences early this morning, and she brought up that book.
It's a good book. It's a really good book. I had read her stuff in the academic literature for years, but
yes.
you know, you have to write in these convoluted, dense
I haven't
kind
read
of
her
ways
in a long
academia.
time. Yes.
But then she put it in very accessible terms, and it really confirmed what I first of all what I found in my dissertation many years ago, but what I've been saying for decades is that how we're viewing competence, failure, mistakes, and criticism is key to overcoming imposter feelings. But anyway, it's a whole nother. I'm not going to get into everything in her book, but I recommend.
But recommend that.
I do recommend it. Yeah, it's great for parents
because
too.
it's really about sort of it on the fly being able to switch that mantra that you have going on in your head and reframing a situation.
Yeah, reframing.
Which sometimes people really struggle with the language to do that.
Let me give you a really quick example for the parents who are listening. The
yes.
typical dinner time conversation with school-age kids, and this comes from Dweck's book, is, you know, what did you learn in school today?
Yes.
To which they say, nothing.
Nothing.
Or I don't remember.
Same thing.
She said, wouldn't it be more interesting if once a week, every couple weeks, she said, let's all go around the table and talk about something that was difficult, challenging, or we failed at, and how we handled it. I'll start. Because you really want to teach kids young how to deal with setbacks, challenge, adversity, and
failure.
Yeah.
To normalize that.
Resiliency.
Yes. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
I'm a hugger.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm
so
so glad
much.
we made this work.
Me too. Me too. Thanks so much for listening to today's episode of Unscripted with Nell Daly. If you could right now, we need you to head on over and review us on iTunes. As always, we will personally reach out and thank each and every one of you who do so, but we'd love your reviews, so tell us what you think. And you can always send us emails with either guests you want on the show or comments or questions. We're happy to get those, and you can find those on the website, our contact information at nelldaly.com. To see all of my comings and goings, get updates on who our next guests are going to be, and if you just need a little bit of extra life advice or inspiration, come join me over on Instagram at Nell Daly. I use Instagram every single day. Or like us over on Facebook, and you'll automatically be following us, and that's at Nell Given Daily. That's also where you can watch us live. Before I end, I want to thank our audio editor, Walter Eggers, our video editor and co-producer, Paige McGovern, and our video production manager, Rick Endiver, co-producer, Corey Pakowski, and the rest of the Point Zero Media team. I couldn't do any of this without you. I couldn't. Of course, Teachable HQ, you guys rock. They're an amazing educational technology company. Check them out. I use them. Everybody big in the business uses them. They're just awesome. And a huge shout out of gratitude. Huge. The biggest to all the fans who are following the show. Just like I said last week, I am so humbled by how this is all going. Thank you. Until Monday, everybody, peace out. Have a fun and safe weekend. I love you guys already.